in the front of what's now Sumner Academy of Arts and Sciences, which most of us on the van know it as Sumner High School, the school that we know and love. This school was dedicated in January 1940. The principal speaker, and this is in the room there, is on the board. I hope that people take time to read it. The person who gave the main address was Dr. Sherman Scruggs, who at that time was president of Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, who attended Stowe Elementary School and was a graduate of Sumner High School. Also present was an attorney by the name of William Towers, who was in the state legislature and was greatly responsible for seeing that some of the money was allocated for Sumner High School. Attorney Towers also was a graduate of Sumner High School. For those who might say, well, who was Dr. Scruggs? He was the first African American who was supervisor of Negro elementary schools. They had that back in the day when the schools were segregated. Dr. Scruggs is also the grandfather of Sybil Wilkes, who is on Tom Joyner's show. So when you hear Sybil Wilkes talks, this is a grandfather. In this article, it has the name of the number of people who were present here, dignitaries from all over, including the governor of the state of Kansas. Also, they mention in here that T. Roosevelt Butler, who was the president of the Sumner High School Alumni Association. We may think that we started the Sumner Alumni Association in the 1990s, but it was going on a long time before, in the 1930s. When they moved the school from 9th in Washington to here to 8th in Oakland, a lot of the material, a lot of the equipment was physically carried by the students from 9th and Oakland to here to Sumner High School. The athletic field that you see here, Sumner did not have lights to play football, so they could not play at night. They approached the school district, and of course who would not pay for it, so this is something that's a luxury. So the citizens within this community, led by former Chief of Police Boston Daniels, this was in somewhere between 1952 and 1954. I was overseas in the military because I sent a little donation back. I was in Japan. They raised over $10,000 to put lights out here. This community did, so they could play football at night. That's another one of the little things that many of us are not aware of. I don't know if they have lights down out here now or not, but the community rallied themselves and paid for lights, and Boston Daniels did a fantastic job in raising that amount of money. So you think of $10,000 in the 1950s, that's an amazing fact. And if you could picture what types of jobs the people in this community had, it's more amazing. Okay. As we are aware, the church has played a very significant part in Sumner High School. We're at 8th and Everett, and at this location there are 3 churches. Right across from us is now it's called Mount Calvary Baptist Church. But the church originally, up until probably the 1980s, 1970s, was 8th Street Christian Church. And at this church, Mr. G.B. Buster, who was one of the vice principal of Sumner for a number of years, he was one of the persons who sat at the table when they changed the name from manual training to Sumner High School. Played a very significant role in Sumner. But he was one of the persons who attended that church, along with the Fine family. We'll talk about them, Marietta and Eva Bell, who also attended that church. Also, John McLendon. This is a church that he grew up in. This is a church that he attended. It was called 8th Street Christian Church. Back behind us, we see St. Peter's CME Church. Back in the day, it was St. Peter's was Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. Now it's they removed the word colored. But that was a very integral part of that church, an integral part of this community. Some of the persons who attended this church had a great impact on this community. The church, primarily, that was the church that the Carruthers attended, the Anderson family, Hazel Anderson, which in turn incorporated the Haley family, the Freeman family, the Boswells. And throwing these names out because these are names that you'll read all through Sumner history. Across the street was A Street Baptist Church. A Street Baptist Church originally started probably about 8th and New Jersey, and it was called Rose Hill because there were a number of roses, and they moved here to 8th and Oakland, and played a big impact, and still plays a big impact, has a great impact in this community. There was a Reverend Jackson who started the church here and did a lot of improvement, but then a minister by the name of Reverend I.H. Henderson Sr., and he took it to another level. He was a person who had a great impact on this community. And these churches were in the immediate proximity of Sumner High School, and so you had, well, we could see it when we walked by. And not only did we see the church, we saw the people. Sometimes we'd get out of school, which had a great impact on us. But these are the three of our finest churches that was right adjacent to Sumner High School. On the corner right here, that would be the south east corner, was the residence of S.H. Thompson Sr. He was Dr. S.H. Thompson Sr., who was one of the premier doctors of his time. Was one of the original founders of Douglas Hospital, and as you know, his son was S.H. Thompson Jr., who was the principal of Sumner for a number of years. But this is where his residence was located. We're across the street from First African Methodist Episcopal Church. This church, along with First Baptist Church, are the two oldest African American churches in the city of Kansas City, Kansas. We're here at 8th and Nebraska. First DME was not always located here. The building, we moved here from the corner of 7th and Ann. Currently the 7th Street Casino occupies that location. That location housed First AME Church. Prior to that, First AME and First Baptist started at 5th and State in the home of a lady by the name of Dinah Smith. We call her Aunt Dinah Smith. We'll pass the marker that was placed there. But just the history of this church, which started at First AME and First Baptist, started in 1859, and they worshiped together. The first two pastors, the pastor of the Methodist denomination was a minister by the name of Reverend Buchanan. The pastor of the Baptist was a minister by the name of Joe Strader. They would meet on Sunday morning, have service on Sunday morning, and one Sunday the Baptist minister would preach. The next Sunday the Methodist preacher would preach. And if you wanted to join church, you would go down and give your hand. If you want to join the Methodist, you give your hand to Reverend Buchanan. If you want to join the Baptist, you give your hand to Reverend Strader. Of course, the Baptists, they grew faster and larger than the Methodists. So they, Reverend Freeman, E.A. Freeman, the pastor of First Baptist, used to like to tell this joke, said that one Sunday they began to have little problems as the Baptists grew and they really wanted to leave. And they separated, put a wall between the two churches. And one Sunday the Baptist was singing, "Will There Be a Star in My Crown?" And when they finished, the Methodists wound up saying, "No, not one." So, and one Sunday the Baptist minister, Reverend Strader, was really preaching with fire and brimstone. So we're going to go and take all the bootleg whiskey and throw it in the river. And when he finished, the Methodists started singing, "Shall We Gather at the River?" But there were a lot of stories that were told about these two churches, but they had a significant impact, not only in the African American community, but in the city. First AME, when they moved to 7th and Ann, it was in the country. The city had not grown, and they called it the Church in the Wilderness, and it was called Cottonwood Mission. But it was an AME church, but it was called Cottonwood Mission. It was just a mission, and then that turned into the bigger church which they built. The church moved here in 1900. The area was predominantly white. The whites did not want African Americans in this community, and so the church was purchased in the name of the son of the minister. After they moved and got everything squared away, the son said, "Okay, you all need to pay me $50, else I'm not going to sign the dotted line to turn the church over to you." But then the amazing thing about this is that the members of this church built the building that you see in 2 years with their own hands. Chester Gaskin used to tell the story. He was a little boy. So when the men would get off from work in the evening, if you could imagine what type of jobs they had in 1900, the men, they would come here and work. And the women in the 800 block here on Nebraska, the women at 2 houses would cook. They too worked. Many of them worked, but there were a number of them who did not work. And as a young man, as a boy, they would bring the food from the 800 block on Nebraska, from these 2 houses here, and the men would eat. They built this building with their own hands in 2 years.
Which building is that? Got a picture of the building?
You think about that, utterly amazing. I have a picture of them when they are doing what is called the topping out of this church. It wasn't completed. The church looks basically the same as it did in 1900. If you're at Liberty Bank, if you go in there, we have some pictures there of First AME Church. And some of the members here was I.F. Bradley, which is an amazing story. We'll talk a little bit about him as we get in his where he lived down on 400 Haskell. S.H. Thompson family, a number of attorneys. Some of the people that you know, Elmer Jackson, and please, when I say this, I'm not trying to distinguish between class, because as I always state, the garbage worker is just as important as a person who's making $1 million a year. And if you don't believe it, let them stop picking up your garbage. And so I don't make distinction between people, but it's people that normally have been in the news. So you have the Meeks family, you had Elmer Jackson, you had a number of people who were professional. Matter of fact, this was called the Silk Stocking Church, not only by the AMEs, but also by persons in this city. In the 1920s, the national NAACP meeting was held here. This housed the national meeting. Can you imagine with having, say at that time, maybe 5,000 people attending a national NAACP meeting? And you couldn't stay in the hotels. They had to stay in homes. Also, Kansas City, Kansas and First AME hosted the AME Joint Conference in 1948. We just moved to Kansas City from Arkansas, and there were over 15,000 people. Keep in mind, you could not stay in hotels. And so the housing committee had to house all of these delegates. Just to give you an example, we lived at 6 in Washington. We'd only lived here 2 years. And there were 8 children, plus my mom and dad. So there were 2 people. It was a big house. And my mother rented a sofa and rented pallets on the floor for $2 a night. And so people would live wherever they could. In the 800 block on Nebraska, one of the little known facts, and I don't know how we do this, Mr. Granville, this is a project for you. Kansas City, Kansas is probably one of the few cities that have 2 persons that are in National Halls of Fame. One of them is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Who went to Sumner High School? He went to the old school when it was at 9th and Minnesota, when it was closed after the incident that occurred in 1904. He attended the original Sumner High School for about 1.5 years, and he left because they did not have a baseball team. His name was Wilbert Bullet Rogan, who is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. There is nothing in Kansas City, Kansas, to commemorate that. You will see it in the Negro Leagues Museum. But when you think in terms of this is something that we need to do to commemorate that. Also, in the 900 block on Nebraska, this is 9th and, we're at 8th in Nebraska. There were two sisters, Marietta Fine and Eva Bell Fine. They were both tennis players and great tennis players. The tennis court basically was at 10th and Washington Boulevard. Marietta Fine would go, she and her brother, Eva Bell, and their brother would go to the National Negro Tournament, which was held in Richmond, Virginia. And for some of the younger persons, matter of fact, everybody on the van, probably except me, cannot remember when we couldn't participate in the National Tennis Association. But Marietta would go every year. And Althea Gibson was approximately 10 to 12 years younger than her. And that was the only person that she could not defeat. She would wind up in the finals of the National Tennis Championship every year, and she could not defeat Althea Gibson. Now, we have a video of Marietta talking about her experience and her life. She was a teacher in elementary school for approximately 35 years. Her sister Eva Bell, they would win the doubles, the women's doubles in the national tournament every year for a number of years in Richmond, Virginia. And then when her brother, he and Marietta would win the mixed doubles every year. And there's nothing to commemorate Marietta. Marietta and Eva Bell are both in the Heart of America Tennis Hall of Fame, which is located in Kansas, Missouri. There's nothing here to commemorate those persons. Just a little incident, not an incident, but in the 1990s, Arthur Ashe came here. We brought him here through the city to conduct a series of workshops for a week. Ashe Bolletary, what they called it. We were at, not Kensington, the one there on 27th Street. We're at the park. And I was out there and was talking to a guy by the name of Davis who assisted Arthur Ashe. And I asked him, I said, have you ever heard of a lady by the name of Marietta Fine? And he's come and said, Marietta Fine. And he said, does she live here? And I said, yes, she lives here. One of them got Arthur Ashe, said, Mr. said, if you can get her, can you get her and bring her out here to the park? And we went to Marietta's house. She lived in Parkwood. Brought her there to the park. And her comment when she first got there was a guy named Davis, and she called him Hello Spindly Legs. And he said very few people knew him by that name. Arthur Ashe walked up and hugged her and said, Miss Fine, said, when I was a little boy in Richmond, Virginia, I would go to those tournaments, those finals, and watch you and Althea Gibson in those championship battles. And he said, and I patterned my backhand after you. I've never had the opportunity to thank you. Amazing. There's nothing here to commemorate these two people. And the other person is John McClendon. And we'll talk a little bit about him. We'll get an area where he lived. But we have three people here. There's nothing to commemorate them. All graduates of Sumner High School. At First DME Church, there was a Boy Scout troop called Troop 11, which was the oldest African-American Boy Scout troop in the state of Kansas. In Kansas City, Kansas, there were a number of Eagle Scouts. It started in 1936. I couldn't find my sheet on it, but the scoutmaster was Sherman Scruggs, and his assistant was S.H. Thompson. And we have a listing of the first people who were a part of Troop 11, which include John McClendon, Otis Burdette, some of the names that some of you may remember or may see in the history there at the alumni room. John McClendon's brother, Arthur McClendon, but we have a whole listing of them. Now the Eagle Scouts, here, and I had a list and I walked out of the house and forgot them. And I tried to remember them last night, all of them. But The oldest was Frank Newman, who was the same high school class that I was, 1949, was an Eagle Scout, along with Dr. Hardy Shoemate and his brother Alton Shoemate, Robert Brady, Francis Harrison, Arthur Spears, Wendell Robbins Jr. There were about 14 Eagle Scouts, and that's all I could remember. I've got a list of them up someplace there at the house, but I couldn't find them. But they all came out of this church here. There was another scout troop at Olivet, was Scout Troop 49, which is headed by Mr. Leroy Ferguson. But you know, it's when we look now and we see no Boy Scout troops in the predominantly African American area. Now, maybe there are some, I just don't know. We still have some of the remnants of Troop 11. And I'm asking that members of Sumner High School be aware of our history and don't let any more stuff get thrown out. I picked the flag of Troop 11 and some more stuff of Troop 11 at First Day Church, where people should have known better, had thrown it in the trash. And it just happened. I was up here and I pulled it out of the trash. Now let me say something I should have said at the very beginning. People often ask me, how do you know this? How do you remember this? Well, I've always been interested in history, but when I began to I worked for H.W. Sewing, which we'll talk a little bit about him too. But when I started working for him in January of 1959, one of the jobs that I had was I had to go talk to all the people. He had insurance on. We insured the house and car. And that was almost 100 people a month. And so I had an opportunity to talk to many older people all over the city. At that time, in 1959, H.W. Sewing Company was an insurance agency. We insured 99% of the churches that was in the predominant Northeast area. Now, that's another story there, which we won't go in as to how we were able to do that. And we insured approximately 50% of the churches in Kansas, Missouri. And that continued up until 1968, which is really a whole nother story. But going around talking to these many people who would actually give me material, tell me about the history of this area, and I just really took an interest in it. I might say that Betty Maddox, who's on the van, I probably would never have known Betty Maddox had it not been for H.W. Sewing Company. And to show you the relationship between the businesses and Sumner High School, they would send the students out to businesses, a number of them to work. And Betty worked at H.W. Sewing Company and was an excellent employee. I'd like to tell this about Betty. Betty called me one day and said, Chester, this is Betty. And I had heard from Betty in years. She said, I'm sitting in the director of CASA, something in Seattle, and said, I want to thank you for what you did. She said, I hated you when I worked down there. I didn't like you at all, because if you came in to do the work, it had to be perfect. Mrs. Sewing said, do not accept any erasures. And they had types, you know, they had carbon paper. And Betty, we'd make them do stuff over. But she said, I understand now. Betty probably doesn't remember that, but Betty was an excellent employee. Now, coupled with the business community was very active. Betty also represented H.W. Sewing Company in the Northeast Business Association exposition. And did you win, Betty? Second prize. And so you had all of this going. But I just think in terms of how we're missing all of this, I would never have known this gracious lady had not this relationship existed between Sumner High School and the business community. And they were all over the place. There were a number of businesses out here. So thank you, Betty. And I don't think she still hates me. Okay.